Let's go ahead now and create this growth path when we see our savings rate increase at time period equal to 0. So if you've already watched the video on the increase in technology, this is going to be similar, but not exactly the same. I'm also going to walk through setting this up so that way you have more experience setting up the growth path. So remember, this is a time series model, so that means that we're showing how this is changing over time, and we're modeling the growth of output per worker and also capital per worker at the same time. We're saying there's some arbitrary time period where we see a shock. In this case, our shock is savings increasing. So let's say this increases at t equals 0, meaning that before this we are in steady state. So we have my level of capital as a steady state beforehand, and we have my level of output per worker as a steady state before the shock. What do we know? Well, we watched the video already on the Solow model and how the savings rate changes that. We know that capital is going to increase, so there's going to be some new K star, let's call this K star prime, that eventually after convergence, we're going to see it look like this. We're going to see it increase. Increase in savings does increase capital. And we saw that that also led to an increase in output. Higher capital means higher output. We know that as well. And so when they both get to a new steady state, we know that's going to occur. So this is what we're going to look like. But what we care always about is how that convergence happens. So when we watched the video, we noticed that, there's a shock. It doesn't change capital right away. Capital starts to react because, it starts to react because the investment needed is different from the actual savings and investment. What about output? Well, let's look at output, right? Remember, output equals A times F of K. Notice that savings is not in here. S is not in this function. So that means there is not any amplification effect. There's nothing else that's impacting Y except for K. So as K starts to converge, it starts to push up Y, which is converging as well, and it gets to this steady state straight line, right? So unlike the technology, right, those 2 points end up being the same, and there is not an amplification effect, and there is not a gap because S is not in the overall function for output, our per worker production function. It's not there. And so therefore we're going to not see that gap or that amplification effect.